Akagi was an aircraft carrier built for the Imperial Japanese Navy, named after Mount Akagi in present-day Gunma Prefecture. Though she was laid down as an Amagi-class battlecruiser, Akagi was converted to an aircraft carrier while still under construction to comply with the terms of the Washington Naval Treaty. The ship was rebuilt from 1935 to 1938 with her original 3 flight decks consolidated into a single enlarged flight deck and an island. Superstructure, the second Japanese aircraft carrier to enter service, and the first large or fleet carrier, Akagi figured prominently in the development of the IJN's new carrier striking force doctrine that grouped carriers together, concentrating their air power. This doctrine enabled Japan to attain its strategic goals during the early stages of the Pacific War from December 1941 until mid-1942. Akagi's aircraft served in the Second Sino-Japanese War in the late 1930s. Upon the formation of the First Air Fleet Aikido-Butai in early 1941, she became its flagship, and remained so for the duration of her service. With other fleet carriers, she took part in the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 and the invasion of Rabaul in the Southwest Pacific in January 1942. The following month, her aircraft bombed Darwin, Australia, and assisted in the conquest of the Dutch East Indies. In March and April 1942, Akagi's aircraft helped sink a British heavy cruiser and an Australian destroyer in the Indian Ocean raid. After a brief refit, Akagi and 3 other fleet carriers of the Aikido-Butai participated in the Battle of Midway in June 1942. After bombarding American forces on the atoll, Akagi and the other carriers were attacked by aircraft from Midway and the carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. Dive bombers from Enterprise severely damaged Akagi. When it became obvious she could not be saved, she was scuttled by Japanese destroyers to prevent her from falling into enemy hands. The loss of Akagi and 3 other IJN carriers at Midway was a crucial strategic defeat for Japan and contributed significantly to the Allies' ultimate victory in the Pacific. Design, construction and launch. Akagi was laid down as an Amagi-class battlecruiser at Kure, Japan, on the 6th of December 1920. The ship was named after Mount Akagi, following the Japanese ship naming conventions for battlecruisers. Construction was halted, however, when Japan signed the Washington Naval Treaty on 6 February 1922. The treaty placed restrictions on the construction of battleships and battlecruisers, although it authorized conversion of 2 battlecruiser hulls under construction into aircraft carriers of up to 33,000 long tons displacement. The IJN had decided, following the launch of its first aircraft carrier, Hosho, to construct 2 larger, faster carriers for operations with major fleet units. The incomplete hulls of Amagi and Akagi were thus selected for completion as the 2 large carriers under the 1924 Fleet Construction Program. 24.7 million yen was originally budgeted to complete Akagi as a battlecruiser, and an estimated 8 million yen had been expended when construction stopped in February 1922. Shortly thereafter, the Diet approved an additional 90 million yen to complete Akagi and Amagi as carriers. Construction of Akagi as an aircraft carrier began on 19 November 1923. Amagi's hull was damaged beyond economically feasible repair in the Great Kanto earthquake of 1 September 1923 and was broken up and scrapped. Akagi, the only remaining member of her class, was launched as a carrier on the 22nd of April 1925 and commissioned at Kure Naval Arsenal on the 25th of March 1927. Although trials continued through November 1927, She was the second carrier to enter service with the IJN, after Hosho and before Kaga. Since Akagi was initially conceived as a battlecruiser, the prevailing ship naming conventions dictated that she be named after a mountain. Akagi came from Mount Akagi, a dormant volcano in the Kanto region. After she was redesignated as an aircraft carrier, her mountain name remained. In contrast to ships like Soru that were originally built as aircraft carriers which were named after flying creatures, her name was previously given to the Amagi-class gunboat Akagi. Akagi was completed at a length of 261.21 meters overall. She had a beam of 31 meters and, at deep load, a draft of 8.08 meters. She displaced 26,900 long tons at standard load and 34,364 long tons at full load, nearly 7,000 long tons less than her designed displacement as a battlecruiser. Her complement totaled 1,600 crew members. Flight deck arrangements. Akagi and Kaga were completed with 3 superimposed flight decks, the only carriers ever to be designed so. The British carriers converted from large light cruisers, HMS Glorious, HMS Courageous, and HMS Furious, each had 2 flight decks, but there is no evidence that the Japanese copied the British model. It is more likely that it was a case of convergent evolution to improve launch and recovery cycle flexibility by allowing simultaneous launch and recovery of aircraft. Akagi's main flight deck was 190.2 meters long, her middle flight deck was only 15 meters long and her lower flight deck was 55.02 meters long. The utility of her middle flight deck was questionable as it was so short that only some lightly loaded aircraft could use it, even in an era when the aircraft were much lighter and smaller than during World War II. The upper flight deck sloped slightly from amidships toward the bow and toward the stern to assist landings and takeoffs for the underpowered aircraft of that time. As completed, the ship had 2 main hangar decks and a third auxiliary hangar, giving a total capacity of 60 aircraft. The third and lowest hangar deck was only used for storing disassembled aircraft. The 2 main hangars opened onto the middle and lower flight decks to allow aircraft to take off directly from the hangars while landing operations were in progress on the main flight deck above. The upper and middle hangar areas totaled about 80,375 square feet, the lower hangar about 8,515 square feet. No catapults were fitted. Her forward aircraft lift was offset to starboard and 11.8 by 13 meters in size. Her aft lift was on the centerline and 12.8 by 8.4 meters. The aft elevator serviced the upper flight deck and all 3 hangar decks. Her arresting gear was an unsatisfactory British longitudinal system used on the carrier Furious that relied on friction between the arrestor hook and the cables. The Japanese were well aware of this system's flaws, as it was already in use on the first carrier, Hosho, but had no alternatives available when Akagi was completed. It was replaced during the ship's refit in 1931 with a Japanese-designed transverse cable system with 6 wires, and that was replaced in turn before Akagi began her modernization in 1935 by the Kure Model 4 type. There was no island superstructure when the carrier was completed. The carrier was commanded from a space below the forward end of the upper flight deck. The ship carried approximately 150,000 US gallons of aviation fuel for her embarked aircraft. As originally completed, Akagi carried an air group of 28 Mitsubishi B-1M3 torpedo bombers, 16 Nakajima A-1N fighters and 16 Mitsubishi 2MR reconnaissance aircraft. Armament and armor. Akagi was armed with 10 50 caliber 20 cm 3rd year Type No. 1 guns, 6 in casemates aft and the rest in 2 twin-gun turrets, 1 on each side of the middle flight deck. They fired 110 kilogram projectiles at a rate of 3 to 6 rounds per minute with a muzzle velocity of 870 meters per second at 25 degrees. This provided a maximum range between 22,600 and 24,000 meters. The turrets were nominally capable of 70 degrees elevation to provide additional anti-aircraft fire, but in practice the maximum elevation was only 55 degrees. The slow rate of fire and the fixed 5 degrees loading angle minimized any real anti-aircraft capability. This heavy gun armament was provided in case she was surprised by enemy cruisers and forced to give battle, but her large and vulnerable flight deck, hangars, and superstructure made her more of a target in any surface action than a fighting warship. Carrier doctrine was still evolving at this time, and the impracticality of carriers engaging in gun duels had not yet been realized. The ship carried dedicated anti-aircraft armament of 6 twin 45 caliber 12 cm 10th year type gun mounts fitted on sponsons below the level of the funnels, where they could not fire across the flight deck, 3 mounts per side. These guns fired 20.3-kilogram projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 825 to 830 meters per second at 45 degrees. This provided a maximum range of 16,000 meters, and they had a maximum ceiling of 10,000 meters at 75 degrees elevation. Their effective rate of fire was 6 to 8 rounds per minute. Akagi's waterline armored belt was reduced from 254 to 152 mm and placed lower on the ship than originally designed. The upper part of her torpedo bulge was given 102 mm of armor. Her deck armor was also reduced from 96 to 79 mm. The modifications improved the ship's stability by helping compensate for the increased topside weight of the double hangar deck. Propulsion. In Akagi's predecessor, Hosho, the hot exhaust gases vented by swiveling funnels posed a danger to the ship, and wind tunnel testing had not suggested any solutions. Akagi and Kaga were given different solutions to evaluate in real-world conditions. Akagi was given 2 funnels on the starboard side. The larger forward funnel was angled 30 degrees below horizontal with its mouth facing the sea, and the smaller one exhausted vertically a little past the edge of the flight deck. The forward funnel was fitted with a water cooling system to reduce the turbulence caused by hot exhaust gases and a cover that could be raised to allow the exhaust gases to escape if the ship developed a severe list and the mouth of the funnel touched the sea. Kaga adopted a version of this configuration when she was modernized during the mid-1930s. Akagi was completed with 4 Giffon-geared steam turbine sets, each driving 1 propeller shaft, that produced a total of 131,000 shaft horsepower. Steam for these turbines was provided by 19 Type B Campon boilers with a working pressure of 20 kilograms per square centimeter. Some boilers were oil-fired, and the others used a mix of fuel oil and coal. As a battlecruiser, she was expected to achieve 28.5 knots, but the reduction in displacement from 41,200 to 34,000 long tons increased her maximum speed to 32.5 knots, which was reached during her sea trials on the 17th of June 1927. She carried 3,900 long tons of fuel oil and 2,100 long tons of coal that gave her a range of 8,000 nautical miles at 14 knots. Early service. Akagi joined the Combined Fleet in August 1927 and was assigned to the 1st Carrier Division upon its formation on 1 April 1928. serving as the division's flagship under Rear Admiral Sankichi Takahashi. The carrier's early career was uneventful, consisting of various training exercises. For the 10th of December 1928 to the 1st of November 1929, the ship was captained by Isoroku Yamamoto, future commander of the Combined Fleet. Akagi was reduced to second-class reserve status on the 1st of December 1931 in preparation for a short refit in which her arresting gear was replaced and her radio and ventilation systems were overhauled and improved. After completion of the refit, Akagi became a first-class reserve ship in December 1932. On the 25th of April 1933, she resumed active service and joined the 2nd Carrier Division and participated in that year's Special Fleet maneuvers. At this time, the IJN's carrier doctrine was still in its early stages. Akagi and the IJN's other carriers were initially given roles as tactical force multipliers supporting the fleet's battleships in the IJN's decisive battle doctrine. In this role, Akagi's aircraft were to attack enemy battleships with bombs and torpedoes. Aerial strikes against enemy carriers were later deemed of equal importance, with the goal of establishing air superiority during the initial stages of battle. The essential component in this strategy was that the Japanese carrier aircraft must be able to strike first with a massed, preemptive aerial attack. In fleet training exercises, the carriers began to operate together in front of or with the main battle line. The new strategy emphasized maximum speed from both the carriers and the aircraft they carried, as well as larger aircraft with greater range. Thus, longer flight decks on the carriers were required in order to handle the newer, heavier aircraft which were entering service. As a result, on the 15th of November 1935, Akagi was placed in third-class reserve to begin an extensive modernization at Sasebo Naval Arsenal. Reconstruction. Akagi's modernization involved far less work than that of Kaga, but took 3 times as long due to financial difficulties related to the Great Depression. The ship's 3 flight decks were judged too small to handle the larger and heavier aircraft then coming into service. As a result, the middle and lower flight decks were eliminated in favor of 2 enclosed hangar decks that extended almost the full length of the ship. The upper and middle hangar area's total space increased to about 93,000 square feet. The lower hangar remained the same size. The upper flight deck was extended to the bow, increasing its length to 249.17 meters and raising aircraft capacity to 86. A third elevator midships, 11.8 by 13 meters in size, was added. Her arrestor gear was replaced by a Japanese-designed hydraulic Type 1 system with 9 wires. The modernization added an island superstructure on the port side of the ship, which was an unusual arrangement. The only other carrier to share this feature was a contemporary, the Hiryu. The port side was chosen as an experiment to see if that side was better for flight operations by moving the island away from the ship's exhaust outlets. The new flight deck inclined slightly fore and aft from a point about 3/8 of the way aft. Akagi's speed was already satisfactory, and the only changes to her machinery were the replacement of the mixed coal-oil-fired boilers with modern oil-fired units and the improvement of the ventilation arrangements. Although the engine horsepower increased from 131,200 to 133,000, her speed declined slightly from 32.5 to 31.2 knots on trials because of the increase in her displacement to 41,300 long tons. Her bunkerage was increased to 7,500 long tons of fuel oil, which increased her endurance to 10,000 nautical miles at 16 knots. The rear vertical funnel was changed to match the forward funnel and incorporated into the same casing. The two twin turrets on the middle flight deck were removed and 14 twin 25mm Type 96 gun mounts were added on sponsons. They fired 25 kg projectiles at a muzzle velocity of 900 meters per second at 50 degrees. This provided a maximum range of 7,500 meters and an effective ceiling of 5,500 meters. The maximum effective rate of fire was only between 110 to 120 rounds per minute due to the frequent need to change the 15-round magazines. 6 Type 95 directors were fitted to control the new 25mm guns, and 2 new Type 94 anti-aircraft directors replaced the outdated Type 91s. After the modernization, Akagi carried 1 Type 89 director for the 20cm guns. It is uncertain how many were carried before then. The ship's crew increased to 2,000 after the Reconstruction. The ship's anti-aircraft guns were grouped amidships and placed relatively low on the hull. Thus, the guns could not be brought to bear directly forward or aft. Also, the island blocked the forward arcs of the port battery. As a result, the ship was vulnerable to attack by dive bombers. The ship's 12cm 10th-year type guns were scheduled to be replaced by more modern 12.7cm Type 89 mounts in 1942. The anti-aircraft sponsons were to be raised one deck to allow them some measure of cross-deck fire, as was done during Kaga's modernization. However, the ship was lost in combat before the upgrade could take place. Several major weaknesses in Akagi's design were not rectified. Akagi's aviation fuel tanks were incorporated directly into the structure of the carrier, meaning that shocks to the ship, such as those caused by bomber shell hits, would be transmitted directly to the tanks, resulting in cracks or leaks. Also, the fully enclosed structure of the new hangar decks made firefighting difficult, at least in part because fuel vapors could accumulate in the hangars. Adding to the danger was the requirement of the Japanese carrier doctrine that aircraft be serviced, fueled, and armed whenever possible on the hangar decks rather than on the flight deck. Furthermore, the carrier's hangar and flight decks carried little armor protection, and there was no redundancy in the ship's fire extinguishing systems. These weaknesses would later be crucial factors in the loss of the ship. Lead up to World War II, Akagi's modernization was completed on the 31st of August 1938. She was reclassified as a first reserve ship on the 15th of November, but did not rejoin the 1st Carrier Division until the following month. In her new configuration, the carrier embarked 12 Mitsubishi A5M Type 96 Claude fighters with 4 disassembled spares, 19 Aichi D-1A Suzy dive bombers with 5 spares, and 35 Yokosuka B-4Y Jean horizontal torpedo bombers with 16 spares. She sailed for southern Chinese waters on the 30th of January 1939 and supported ground operations there, including attacks on Guilin and Luzhou, until the 19th of February, when she returned to Japan. Akagi supported operations in central China between the 27th of March and the 2nd of April 1940. She was reclassified as a special-purpose ship on the 15th of November 1940, while she was being overhauled. The Japanese experiences off China had helped further develop the IJN's carrier doctrine. One lesson learned in China was the importance of concentration and mass in projecting naval air power ashore. Therefore, in April 1941, the IJN formed the first air fleet, or Kido-Butai, to combine all of its fleet carriers under a single command. On the 10th of April, Akagi and Kaga were assigned assigned to the 1st Carrier Division as part of the new carrier fleet, which also included the 2nd and 5th Carrier Divisions. The IJN centered its doctrine on air strikes that combined the air groups of entire carrier divisions, rather than individual carriers. When multiple carrier divisions were operating together, the division's air groups were combined. This doctrine of combined, massed, carrier-based air attack groups was the most advanced of its kind in the world. The IJN, however, remained concerned that concentrating all of its carriers together would render them vulnerable to being wiped out all at once by a massive enemy air-surface strike. Thus, the IJN developed a compromise solution in which the fleet carriers would operate closely together within their carrier divisions, but the divisions themselves would operate in loose rectangular formations, with approximately 7,000 meters separating each carrier. The Japanese doctrine held that entire carrier air groups should not be launched in a single mass attack. Instead, each carrier would launch a deckload strike of all its aircraft that could be spotted at one time on each flight deck. Subsequent attack waves consisted of the next deckload of aircraft. Thus, 1st Air Fleet air attacks would often consist of at least 2 massed waves of aircraft. The 1st Air Fleet was not considered to be the IJN's primary strategic striking force. The IJN still considered the 1st Air Fleet an integral component in the combined fleet's Kantei-Keisen or decisive battle task force centered on battleships. Akagi was designated as the flagship for the 1st Air Fleet, a role the ship retained until her sinking 14 months later. Although the concentration of so many fleet carriers into a single unit was a new and revolutionary offensive strategic concept, the 1st Air Fleet suffered from several defensive deficiencies that gave it, in Mark Petey's words, a glass jaw. It could throw a punch but couldn't take one. Japanese carrier anti-aircraft guns and associated fire control systems had several design and configuration deficiencies that limited their effectiveness. Also, the IJN's fleet combat air patrol consisted of too few fighter aircraft and was hampered by an inadequate early warning system, including lack of radar. In addition, poor radio communications with the fighter aircraft inhibited effective command and control of the CAP. Furthermore, the carriers escorting warships were not trained or deployed to provide close anti-aircraft support. These deficiencies, combined with the shipboard weaknesses previously detailed, would eventually doom Akagi and other 1st Air Fleet carriers.